Few minutes, geez. I'll just take a moment and can I seal the end? Sure. I'm Chelsea. I am not from directly or exclusively the Ethereum Classic community, but I am a huge fan of Ethereum Classic, and I finally hold a little bit of it. I'm mostly a Bitcoiner, but I have been fascinated with Ethereum Classic because when the fork happened, I was a DAO token holder. I have since lost access to those, but I was one of the people who genuinely did not want a fork. And then I was in our little basement community here, so I had no access to what was actually going on politically at that time. I learned it later. And then I found out that this group had done what I had wanted. And like as a social theorist, I found it fascinating. Imagine if after the French Revolution, instead of like stabbing Marat, Charlotte Corday had been able to fork and have a separate set of resources when the group disagreed. Like that's very rare in the history of social things. So that's my interest in ETC, and I'm going to have an actual talk later, so I'll zip it now.
Okay. So, you know, the other speakers here have already, or the other panelists here have already spoken, but just briefly here, we have Donald McIntyre, we have Kevin Lord, we have my companion, Yaz, and we have Terry Culver, CEO of ETC Labs. That company, what are you called again? So yeah, let me just start with a really easy question. So what do each of you do in terms of community engagement, and what do you do? What works well? What doesn't work well? Just a brief summary of where you sit and how you see that. Yes.
I think what works best is just talking to folks. I think at the end of the day, we all share a commitment to ETC and its community, even if we have differences of opinion. And so I think those conversations are extremely helpful in remembering that we do, at a very fundamental level, share some very common values. Practically speaking, what we do at ETC Labs to build community is we focus on building the ecosystem through the accelerator by bringing projects in and encouraging developers to build on it. And we also do a lot of community outreach, particularly in Asia, where we've seen exceptional growth, and we hope to make that more a part of the summit next year.
I think for me, the thing we should, we try to focus on, at least from the co-op point of view, is empathy. Empathy for the developer, their problems, how to, try to onboard them. Empathy for the community members and their concerns. I mean, I'm known sometimes to lose my shit, but I try to be empathetic as well.
I'd say one of the main things that we do is communicate. So we communicate between the network participants, we communicate between stakeholders. And without that, there's really grinds to a halt. So communication is really one of the main things we do. When Bob asked that question, I was like, there's way too much to answer for because it's so broad. But yeah, we communicators.
What I started to do for the community in the last year was write many blog posts. Because I saw that there were not many bloggers writing about Ethereum Classic. And there's typical basic questions that people have about Bitcoin or crypto in general, Ethereum. And there's always a what is Bitcoin blog post, why is Bitcoin valuable blog post, what is Ethereum, how does it work, what are smart contracts, etc. So I said, okay, that's a niche that is not covered for Ethereum Classic, so I started to write articles like what is Ethereum Classic for layman's terms, why does Ethereum Classic have value. Also, for example, why does Bitcoin have value? There's many articles about that, and there's no specific article for Ethereum Classic. Or when other networks have these articles that explain to the layman public, they always do it as a comparison to Bitcoin. But what I did is to do Ethereum Classic centered articles, only like internally contained. Why are they about Ethereum Classic? Why does it have value internally, etc. And not as a comparison to others.
I really like the work you've been doing on Etherplan, like the content you've been releasing. I troll from the margins. That's my job. And what I try to bring forth in all of my interactions with the Ethereum Classic community and others that share my values of immutability and censorship resistance is that social media presents us with a platform where everyone has an equal voice in the conversation. And we can't recreate old structures of passing down press releases as a primary top-down method of communication. So I just agitate academically.
So I think it's been the case for much of Ethereum Classic's history that it has been, a very community-driven, small group, really, united by ideology rather than necessarily by practicality. That we've seen Classic, really lagging behind Ethereum in terms of the protocol, in terms of tooling support. That even if you prefer the ideology, practically it's been hard. Now I'd say that we're seeing a big shift in that over the last year, and that kind of shift is threatening, obviously, because for-profit companies versus community, commons, peace, grassroots, don't necessarily have the same, mindsets or so on. So how would you say that, incentives differ between those two types of groups, and where is the real commonality?
Well, I think it varies. I think, at least in the ETC community now, the commonality is a commitment to this particular public blockchain and its growth. I do think that there's a challenge as it grows that the principles can migrate or evolve or even become more diluted. And I think as blockchain adoption grows, the threat of corporate capture becomes even greater. And I don't think it comes from folks who are in this ecosystem already. I think it comes from a Libra. It comes from a very large corporate actor who has enormous resources that will sort of go around us rather than, come inside and take over.
Just a little note. I don't know if people saw that there was a news article today that was saying that PayPal have abandoned the Libra efforts. So perhaps they are one of oh dear. So perhaps they were one of many who are perhaps having second thoughts about whether that's a good idea or not.
I think corporations do have a role to play in terms of increasing adoption, but I think it might also just to some degree, unless there's real use cases from a grassroots movement, let's say people in Venezuela, to deal with hyperinflation, maybe they want to do highly secure smart contracts using ETC. You see the case a lot for BTC. So I think the grassroots movement where they can you see people on the that are marginalized and unbanked, those people, and not necessarily the community coming together, a bunch of friends online coming together. These kind of use cases is what grows the ecosystem more than any corporation can grow. The corporation can create infrastructure and tools for people to build third-party products and services, but the use cases are what matter, in my opinion.
I would just say whoever has the money is gonna be more or less getting their way. That's just what it comes down to. So, yeah, that's what it comes down to. Whoever has the resources has the money to pay the devs, has the money to get what they need to get done. And we're all volunteers. And some of us are doing this out of principle and out of love or whatever, but whoever has the money can pay the devs. They can pay for whatever they need. So that's how I see those two ecosystems. The Ethereum ecosystem obviously had the ICO, the pre-sale, and they dumped ETC, a lot of different things, a lot of different ways they got resources. So that's kind of how I see the landscape.
I think that what you said, Bob, of this transition to where now we have players that are more corporate and larger, and could be seen as a threat for the incumbents in the community, etc. In this event, I think I realized that ETC started like in the foundational phase with Igor, Elaine, Arvico, the founders, that what is gravity, the guys who saved it when Ethereum forked off the mainnet. Then I think that soon after that there was like a tribal period where everybody thought like Ethereum and Ethereum Classic and EOS and Cardano, Bitcoin Cash, etc. Everybody was fighting for their identity and to survive, and thinking that it's a life or death situation.
Zero-sum thinking.
Excuse me?
Zero-sum game thinking.
Yes, but which has a natural and business and economic justification, because there's 2,000 or 2,800 tokens, and there's only 3 or 4 that are going to survive. So it was not a zero-sum thinking because it was irrational. It was rational. But in this, what I'm realizing now, and it's funny because in my own presentation I actually implicitly presented it, is that in this future landscape where there are going to be L1 with a few operating systems as proof-of-work systems, and then on top many proof-of-stake systems, it is going to be a new stage of collaboration rather than tribalism or tribalism only. But that doesn't mean that the founding principles are not going to stay there, because those are perennial. And it doesn't mean that tribalism is going to go away, because when you are interoperating with others, you still have to keep your own principles, because that's exactly the value that you're giving to the whole stack. No? So it's very important to acknowledge that, and I think we are going into this collaborative period now.
I am a lot more hopeful around ETCs. Like, there's been a lot more waves perhaps that the ETC community has encountered, but it's blown my mind, and you've mentioned this online before, Bob, that the EF does not have transparent financials, and that was one of the main things that cemented me being like, I can't, my value structure, I can't participate in this, like, until the main funders in a space release their financials. I know it's annoying to redact, etc., so it can be public, but that's super crucial. And what I would add to that is I would love to see in the ETC space more bounty-based stuff coming out of funding agencies, and not just for dev work, but for the sort of like, you know, like for writing for noobs and stuff like that, for community management in different locations. This sort of like unpaid middle ground labor that people are doing for love, putting out some bounties for that, even small scale, is a really positive feedback.
You remember how Vitalik started? So Vitalik's very first involvement in Bitcoin as a 17-year-old, 16-year-old, was finding someone who was paying 5 Bitcoin per article and had a website. So he was a teenager with no money. Well, I can write up some tutorials and things. And then that website, I believe, sort of died. And then he and Mihai founded Bitcoin Magazine. That's how Vitalik started. So yeah, just a final question. So we're just going to have 3, and then we'll go on. Is really, you know, what is it about Ethereum Classic that is most important to you? And you know, what motivates you? Why are you here?
Well, I think
not specifically in the conference, but you know, in the place that you find yourself in your life journey.
Yeah. Well, I think for me, you know, I gave up a fairly comfortable spot to take this on and try to help it grow, mainly because I believe in the fundamental potential of the technology, and I believe that, you know, this community is diverse enough and passionate enough to help fulfill that promise. It certainly makes things a little bit more difficult, but at the end of the day, I think it takes you to a better place.
I have a soft spot for the underdog. Like, and I mean, I've been following Ethereum on Reddit before the DAO fork, and then around the DAO fork, I'm like, what are these nerds talking about? Like, what is this, you know? And I couldn't understand it. And then, but I thought it was really interesting. And after I thought, like, after the fork gets implemented, you know, you're not going to hear about it again. And then Ethereum Classic came out of nowhere, and like, what is that? And around April 2017, you know, I started being in the community more on Slack back when we had, you know, Slack before Discord. And I just loved the ideal, like the principle of the underdog, because at the end of the day, that's what you're here for. You're here for immutability. That's the point of the blockchain. We came out of the 2007 bailout of bankers just to repeat that kind of movement. Like, I don't get it, you know? Like, that's why I thought, like, you know, following the Bitcoin model makes the most sense.
I mean, for myself, really the financial crisis was a catalyst that got me interested in blockchain. Was really that my immediate reaction is just, you know, whoa, you know, run away, hide. You know, we are pawns in these people's games, and how can this happen? But then really, blockchain, or specifically really Ethereum. You know, I was aware of Bitcoin, but you know, okay, it's just money. It's not so interesting versus, oh, we can rebuild social structures and basically have these coordination functions. You know, I really thought, well, I'm a software engineer. I can help. Perhaps I can have a positive, a proactive answer. Not feel weak, but feel maybe there's a solution. Maybe we can soft land this. Anyway, carry on, Kevin.
I would say what keeps me motivated is definitely the community. The community has stuck with each other through thick and thin. A lot of the original founding people are still here. Any kind of upgrade, like with ECIP 1017, the monetary policy, that took a lot of communicating back and forth. It actually took IOHK to send the community manager out to China to actually physically talk and speak with the community out there. But it's a really principled project. It's very grassroots, very aligned with Bitcoin like philosophy, which I really identify with. So yeah.
What attracts me to Ethereum Classic is money, property, and agreements, because I come from Latin America, which is a place, like you said, in Africa, that happens all the time. Dictatorships, confiscation.
These are not theoretical risks in your life.
Yeah, in my lifetime, Argentina has had 5 different currencies. They just take away the old one and they print and they create a new one. So and then about property, in 2001, the Minister of Economy, he said that nobody can withdraw money from the banks, and so that created total chaos, massive poverty. I would say that your motivation was the financial crisis of 2008 to 2009. Latin America lives in a perma-crisis. And forget about Africa or other countries. So that's what attracts me to these systems, or Ethereum Classic in particular. So there can be systems that really don't depend on trusted third parties, and where money, property, and agreements are really true.
I am a Bitcoiner at heart who has been really bummed that my fellow Bitcoiners don't seem to usually care about anything but the economic use case. And lately, you know, we've given up also on like layer 1 peer-to-peer payments as well. So it's something I've kind of continually drifted, and I'll probably be gutted for that. But I ultimately hold Bitcoin as a hedge, but the more hands-on I get with development, the more I want, like, I don't want to play. I learned about Bitcoin, and I don't know if I could do anything interesting with it, but everything I see with ETC dev, it's kind of like wild frontier, get in there. There's lots of people who are excited if you want to learn. So I think that's crucial for a community to like scale on the technical side, is like be developer friendly in that way.
Okay, I think maybe we've got time for a few audience questions, but before that, I'd just like to ask if any of the panelists have questions for other panelists. As we are all sitting here with our varied perspectives.
I have a question. Yo, Donald, what is your favorite color?
My favorite color?
Color, yeah.
Blue.
That's the wrong answer.
It's green, baby.
What?
Green.
Emerald green.
Okay. Slow. Terry, do you think that ETC Labs is going to unarchive Ethereum project?
Unarchive?
Yes.
No, I don't.
Which internal actor in the ecosystem poses the biggest risk to the ecosystem?
Just gunning for it.
Probably the one with the most money.
Who's that?
I mean, something I'd just say on that point, having spent most of my time on the Ethereum ecosystem, is consensus are continually demonized as the big gorilla. You know, obviously they must be evil because they're the largest. Now, my experience of actually working there for real and interacting with these people, like Joe Lubin, one-on-one, and I've had the same experience with Barry Silbert, is the reason that whales get involved is because they are ideologically aligned. It is aligned incentives. If somebody, what you really have is if you have a company in that situation, so should they do less so that people aren't threatened by them?
They should have completely transparent financials and, have a certain amount that is, set aside for community grant type programs.
I think transparency, I would utterly agree with that. But I don't need more personally. Alison, my girlfriend, is very threatened perhaps by my transparency and feels that I'm over-transparent. But no, I would agree that transparency is important for all the ecosystem participants.
And what I would say I've commented before on the consensus thing in the manner that I trust Joe Lubin as a person. What I worry about when we have these conglomerate structures at this early stage is, what about Joe Lubin's grandkid who inherits the company? Are we building structures in which those who are putting forth way more risk than the rest of us, understandably, they need return on that, but are we creating structures that can quickly devolve in the next generation into, the businesses of past?
I mean, I think having a large range of sort of balanced participants is obviously the best answer. But the thing is, to attract those people, you have to grow to a certain size so that there are the benefits there. So the experience I had on the consensus side is everyone's, oh my God, consensus are hiring all the devs and doing everything and blah, 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 blah. And it's like, yeah, but all of this good stuff is coming out of it. It's like, you get the money, you get the money, you get the money. And I think
they also
that's really
fired a huge amount of those people when the market went down. And they were all without a job and without a plan suddenly.
Well, there's obviously a balance there, but I would just point out, Joe Lubin has probably done more to grow the pie than anyone else in the whole of the Ethereum ecosystem. And really, if there were 4 or 5 consensuses, nobody would have a problem. But the way that you get to that is that you grow it so that new participants are drawn in.
Yeah, and in Bitcoin, the role of consensus in Bitcoin is a blockstream. Everybody hates blockstream.
So, saying, oh, well, people are threatened by consensus. So, Joe, can you just spend less money? Can you just sit on your bags, please? That doesn't serve anyone. They are.
It's more about do they retain and absorb all the IP? Are they giving these hubs and spokes fair deals? Things like that. And that's, again, where the transparency comes in. Is are we creating a new means to business?
Again, I would utterly agree with that, is that the means of building trust is ongoing communication and, openness, transparency, policy pieces that are, that are demonstrating, goodwill and good behavior. That when people hide behind opaque structures, you don't know what's happening. And, you know, intrinsically you have a different trust model there. Okay, audience questions.
So, hypothetical scenario, Facebook wants to start a team, 100 developers, you know, $10 million investment, and they want to build a whole bunch of Ethereum-based technologies, like Ethereum clients and wallets and whatever. Do you think that the community should treat them with hostility or with open arms, or be neutral entirely?
I think you should treat it neutrally. Like, if the point is developing open source software, take it. You know, like, adopt it within your ecosystem. Like, you're not, like, they're not bribing you with anything. Like, obviously, I don't trust Libra, I don't trust Zuckerberg, but the one thing I would say positive about Libra is they're adding a lot of major development to Rust.
If I may, I am not talking about Libra at all.
Hypothetically, I'm hypothetically talking.
They want to build an Ethereum classic client.
Yeah, if they want to build one,
or
I would
Facebook
welcome it.
Or Google, or hell, why not like Air Canada?
Right, but like I would welcome it.
It's a permissionless network. Go for it.
It's interesting because this happened with Ethereum. This happened like 2 years ago or whatever. I jumped in behind Vinay Gupta on Twitter when we were pretending we could keep Gab off, like with a social spook. We were just like, no, you can't come here. And it's interesting because that was a completely superficial subset of the Ethereum community being very loud, and Gab ended up going Bitcoin only. So I keep wanting to use their things, even though I don't like their self-selecting community. But it's interesting. I love seeing that the Ethereum Classic folk are like, yeah, you know what, Facebook, come dive in.
Yeah, come dive in. I would be hostile initially.
Me too, Donald. Me too.
My strategy is to be hostile. When poor Zach Mitten came from Consensus to ETC Labs, I was hostile. With you, I was hostile.
I mean, I would look forward for you fighting with Mark Zuckerberg. I think that would be really entertaining.
Trolling him.
Yes.
I don't know if he's going to comment back.
I think we need that.
Okay, anybody else?
Anthony.
Our resident troll again. I have a legitimate question.
I do have legitimate questions. This is actually, I'm not going to make any more statements, phrase as questions. I'm going to just ask the question. Why do you assume that having the most money in the ecosystem is what's going to give you the most control? Why is that?
What is the question? Have the most.
Kevin said that, so I guess he should answer.
You can also think of it too as this is particularly a decentralized ecosystem. I can see in a completely centralized ecosystem, like diamond manufacturer or something like that, yeah, having the most money gives you the most control and permanent incumbency, but why do you think that is in these decentralized spaces?
Just by example, you know, just from history, seeing it happen in real time. But I guess it's just the assumption that if you have the resources, you're going to use them, you'll be successful. It might be a misassumption or, you know, whatnot, but yeah, that's my answer, Anthony.
Does lack of ethics play a part in success?
It could, definitely.
So I guess more to my point then, UASF, for example, resisted the SegWit2x, which I actually at the time thought was a good idea. I realize now that that was a very bad idea for a variety of political reasons, but that was a situation where arguably the people for SegWit2x actually had more funding than the people against it. So you do see these situations, and there's several more in cryptocurrency ecosystems where having the most money doesn't necessarily mean you have the most control. One thing that good decentralized ecosystems do well, in my opinion, is they actually create coordination issues and they make life harder, and that actually helps protect the decentralized ecosystem from that type of capture.
I think that having money in the ecosystem, a lot of money, and being willing to spend, this is not about ETC or ETC Labs or Consensus, it's in general. I think that it has happened that the ones who have a lot of money, in general, in all the blockchains, have more developers. that participate and give their opinion, technical opinions about the future changes of the network. So that is a threat. If the opinions are bad, no, if the changes that they propose are bad, and they have all these appeals to authority, not only just because of the capital they put, like, oh, if I put money, that means that you owe me because I'm supporting all this open source thing for you. The other appeal to authority is, look, I paid all these researchers to write white papers, and you don't get what the white papers say. And because you don't get it, you should just leave me and make the decisions. So they can use many tools using money to appeal to authority, and that intimidates the rest of the community. I think that happens in a blockchain, for example, one or two blockchains where this appeal to authority has reduced the opposition or the counterbalances in the networks, where there's one person who says, I like this, and then everybody aligns with that. Because that one person controls the capital, controls the research, controls all those things. So, but what you're saying is also true. That balance of power that happened in Bitcoin in particular, where 80% of the capital was for SegWit 2x, and just a small fraction of crazy people were against it. The only reason why that small amount of people could stop that change of SegWit 2x is because we live in the era of the internet, where we're all screaming on Twitter, etc., and we are heard even if we don't have money and even if we don't have the academic credentials. So that is an incredible balance of power, and that's why I think, and I said yesterday in my presentation, that toxicity is a good thing in all of these technologies.
Okay, thank you very much. So Kevin has kindly agreed to forfeit his talk, so we're going straight on to you, Chelsea. We are also going to skip the break. If you want to go and have a break, but we're not stopping. We've got to get going. So thank you, everybody.